practical Buddhism. So what that means to me, I have done some stuff that I might call impractical Buddhism. I have done some stuff that I might call impractical Buddhism. And I wonder, have you ever heard of or tried anything that you think might be impractical Buddhism? Or you could broaden it out if you want, impractical Christianity, impractical Advaita. Has anyone ever done an impractical spirituality? Right. So you could take it literally. These could be spiritualities that you cannot practice, right? And some voices from on high will proclaim, oh, yes, this and this idea. Well, what do I do about it? There's nothing to be done about it. Well, thanks. I also find that personally, some of the ideas of traditional Buddhism are almost impracticable without some explanation. So like tonight, we'll come across the idea of subject-object dualism. And this came up in a couple different classes, I think, recently. And then the question, when I read that often, I go, okay, I'm going to give up subject-object dualism. How does that benefit my life or the life of anyone around me? Does that mean I'm going to develop a, what's it, like a codependent issue where I take other people's needs as my own, and then I burn myself out and I become a people pleaser because I no longer discriminate between self and other. What's that one? The borderline, do I develop like some attachment trauma that makes me not figure out where I begin and another ends? Is that what they mean by letting go of subject-object dualism? To me, that would be impractical. And okay, is anyone familiar with the term Kundalini disorder? So I think they might have put it in one of the DSMs or something like that at some point. But this is, or meditation disorders sometimes, or there are some, like if you took too many LSDs back to back, too many heroic doses of something, you can get insights which don't really make you more adaptive, more pro-social, more grounded, more empathetic. They're very transformative. Something transformative happened. Similar things can happen with meditation. People can go on meditation retreats and lose subject-object dualism in a way that isn't really helpful to their family, isn't really helpful to their society, isn't really helpful to their long-term psychological health, or if we wanted to get sort of risky, we could say spiritual health, even though it's hard to define what that might mean. So when I say practical Buddhism, what I mean are there ways that we can engage with some of these traditional teachings that are immediately practicable and benefit our life? Like if I didn't say Buddhism, but I texted my mom, hey, I'm doing a class on, how to overcome cognitive distortions. She'd say, well, what's a cognitive distortion? And then I explained that she should go like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, right? That's, for me, that's what I mean by practical. So there are places I personally subscribe to a lot of the more mystical Buddhist ideas, but then I can't prove those to you. So we're going to hone in on things that we could sort of immediately sink our teeth into. And this is a big slice of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching was, here's something, to paraphrase, he said, all the wise guys I ever talked to said this was a good idea. People in your society will like you if you do it. You'll feel good. Try it out. And they were sort of immediately demonstrable ideas. So we want to see in this class, I want to see if there are any of those in the mind-only school of Buddhism. Does that sound at all fun? Okay, cool. So if you look back through the history of Buddhism, 2,500 odd years, there are a number of different philosophical schools that have come about. So for example, we have fast forward, we have the Soto Zen school, and then there's the Rinzai Zen school. And then back in China, there's like 3 other major ones, in addition to the Lingqi and the Caodong, the blah, 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 blah. And then if you scroll back, then you've also got like the Theravadan schools, who are the last remaining Nikaya early Buddhist tradition. And then they're sort of contrasted against the so-called Mahayana, who sometimes the so-called Vajrayana contrast themselves against. These are all different lineages of Buddhism, but they also involve different philosophical schools. So mind only is a philosophical school of historical Buddhism, and it comes on the scene around, I forgot to look this part up. If I'm remembering correctly, around the 500s is when we get the mind-only school, the Chittamatra school. You don't have to know these Sanskrit terms. Chittamatra means mind-only. And so sometimes if you're reading these scholarly highfalutin texts, they'll say Chittamatra, or other times it'll be called the Yogacara, which means the deep practice school of deep practitioners. So that really comes into the practical Buddhism aspect. So Sanskrit is the Chittamatra and Yogacara. And that's a great idea to know about because these schools are named in Sanskrit because they're not Theravadan early Buddhist schools who wrote things down in Pali when they did. These were highfalutin philosophical schools of the Common Era, right? First century, second, third, fourth, fifth century, and they're writing in scholastic language of ancient India. So this is like getting into university Buddhism. This was the time in ancient India when they were establishing these big universities. And the practice, if you see some of the Tibetan monks, they go out and they debate, and they have this whole hand clapping ritual and swinging their mala beads and all this stuff that was developed in the courtyards of these big monastic universities where they learned Sanskrit grammar and they learned how to speak properly and use Aristotelian syllogistic logic to have a debate about Buddhist ideas. So yeah, the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma and the ladder of Mahamudra views. So just forget all the vocabulary words as you wish. I put them in here because I kind of learned this traditionally. And so there are key words that, tell me what my lesson plan is. So the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, and this is also, if you're reading Buddhist books, this is stuff that authors often gloss over and sort of just expect you to know. Oh yeah, this is part of the third turning of the wheel. And then somebody ought to just teach that in a class for 5 minutes and get it over with so that you know. So if you come across this, traditionally in later Buddhist schools, they propose that the historical Buddha taught the Dharma is the dur root in the Proto-Indo-European is similar cognate to our word truth. You can hear it dharma and truth, and also tree, because it's firm, it holds to its essence, and then also druids, who are drvids they were viziers, visualizers of hard truths, something like that. So that's just fun. Anyway, so he turned the wheel of truth, and this is a mechanism they use to describe how, if you look at the oldest Buddhist teachings, which have come down to us into the Theravadan tradition, the Nikayas, the Buddha taught a certain number of things. Mostly he taught no self. Mostly he taught that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. They all lack a self, and they're all kind of a bummer. Right? He taught the Four Noble Truths. Poop happens. There's a cause for it. You could come to inner peace, nirvana, and the way you do that is these 8 steps that the Buddha laid out, the Eightfold Path, right? And that's kind of the first turning of the wheel. A couple other lists of things in there, but that's it. Then around the 1st century, when this university movement starts up, when they start writing in Sanskrit, they start teaching about emptiness, shunyata, which is similar. We don't know who came up with it first, the Shaivite yoga types or the Buddhists, because they're both talking about shunyata. They probably didn't call themselves either one of those until centuries later. Somebody called them that. But emptiness comes on the scene around the 1st century of the Common Era. And this is where you get the Heart Sutra. No eyes, no ears, no nose, no form, no cognitive something or other, etc. Gone beyond, everything is empty. This is considered by most reckonings, the second turning of the wheel. And then a little bit later, around this time, this 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th century-ish, they often refer to as the third turning of the wheel, because the story goes that somebody heard the Buddha say, there's no eyes, there's no self, there's no karma. And then they were like, oh no. And they went into these kind of like nihilistic voids. Like, well, how do I live my life then, Lord Buddha? It used to be cool. Like the first one he said, there's suffering. Oh, I agree. My life sucks, man. Let me tell you how to fix it. Ah, great. You're the divine physician. Then he comes around and he's like, you know that thing about suffering I told you about? Doesn't exist. Okay. You know about the path to end suffering? Nope. Can't find that anywhere. No nirvana, nothing. And they were like, what are you talking about, man? And so according to this story, this is mythological, but it plays into the history, at least according to the scholars, right? The mystics might tell you something else. Plays into the history of how Buddhism develops. The third turning of the wheel is the Buddha coming back and saying, oh, no. I said nirvana doesn't exist, but I was being hyperbolic. It was to help you not get too fixated on a like a self. You know, I know in the first turning I said there's no self, but then people still, they thought things had an essence. So I wanted to demolish that. But don't trip out. There's still karma. You're still going to reincarnate. So you still have to be nice to your mom. You still have to, you know, donate to the animal shelter. All that still applies. I was just, you know, really trying to help you get it on this deeper level. And that was called the third turning of the wheel of the Dharma. One of the books historically that this mind-only school comes from is called the Samdhinirmochana Sutra, which means something like the Sutra of my true intent. And we could translate it into, what do they say, common language. There's a word for that I can't think of. As like, what I really meant to say was ... The sutra on what I really meant to say. And we're not going to get into it tonight, but there's a big debate amongst Buddhist schools about which one is the final word, right? So some schools, like if you talk to some of the Gelugpa school of Tibetan Buddhism, they say this: the second turning is the real one, and the third turning was for people who couldn't handle it. And then I don't remember exactly where Zen and Chan come down, but they're influenced by both. Like when you go and chant those patriarchs, Nagarjuna's in there. That's the guy who really promulgated the emptiness doctrine. But then Vasubandhu's in there, who taught the mind only. And so they're both kind of in there. So you have something to work with. So we're not going to solve that debate tonight, but what I'd like to share with you in terms of practical Buddhism is that the three turnings of the wheel are meant to give you something for wherever you find yourself on a certain day, in a certain phase of life, in a certain group, in a certain context. So in many of the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, for example, you know, I tend to fall into like a Dzogchen school of Tibetan Buddhism. And to oversimplify it, they often say that whilst in meditation, you have the view of the second turning. There's no eyes, no ears, no nose, no karma, nobody home, nothing going on. It's it, as it is, baby. That's it. It's just nothing. And even that is nothing. So then when you go about the rest of your life, you do the mind-only view, which is, hey, accumulate some good karma. Hey, check and make sure you're not viewing things through the veil of your past conditioning. Check yourself, because that's very practical in that moment. If you're trying to, you know, serve someone a cup of tea, perhaps a master of meditation serves tea and no one's there, no host, no guest, no tea at all. But for most of us, I believe, maybe it's just me, I need to remember how hot the water is supposed to be and to smile or to take a deep breath. And so there are these different teachings applied to different moments or contexts. Another way to say this is this ladder of Mahamudra views. So another vocab word you can throw away or keep as you like. Mahamudra, Maha is the Sanskrit word for big or great. And you can tell because it comes into the Greek as mega. So mega. And then mudra, I don't know if it has any cognates into the Greek and English, but mudra means like a stamp, like the king's seal. So like, how do you know this came from the king? Got the stamp on there. So they say this is like the great seal or the seal of ultimate reality. In mostly this is in Tibetan teachings nowadays. But the ladder of Mahamudra views speaks to this same thing in that, as it's taught in many Tibetan schools, they lay out the philosophical schools from Buddhist history as if they're like a ladder climbing up to what they call the highest view. I put that in quotes because it's a little bit problematic, but here's how it works. They say rung number one, roughly translated, is impermanence. And so there are times when the mantra, this too shall pass, is the most salvific thing you could practice. Have you ever had a time in your life where the only good news was that eventually it would be over? Has anyone ever experienced this? I certainly have, right? Have you ever had a meditation session where the only good news about that session was that the bell would eventually ring? Yeah, so the thing is, don't denigrate the first rung of the ladder. You sit there and you go like, that bell's gonna ring eventually. It's gonna ring, and even if the bell ringer has passed away, the sun will go down and I'll know that meditation is over. There will be a sign. All things pass. Great news. This is good news from Lord Buddha. A thought comes up and torments you. I remember this thing you did when you were 24. That was stupid. What a stupid person you are. And you can go, keep talking, dude. You'll eventually blow yourself out, right? Because everything passes away. Rung number one. And so rung number two is, well, let's see, what's rung number two? Rung number two, you're not in control. Relax, buddy. You're not in control. Have you ever had a moment where that is salvatory? That's refreshing. I've done this in pastoral care with folks, that we carry around these bags of Santa Claus bags full of guilt, right? And we don't realize that like at least some percentage of that was just the context. You got unlucky context. And so you made unskillful choices. If you were in control of your mind and body, like we think we are, wouldn't we make choices that make us happy? Like when we, according to the philosophy, at least, there's a big discussion. I just uncorked a can of worms, but roughly, broadly, like generally, we want to be happy. And often, even when we make ourselves unhappy, we're sort of trying to get some peace or some ease or some happiness. So if we were in control, would we do all of this stuff that makes ourselves miserable? Buddhism says no. And the reason you were miserable is not because you were in control and you're such a terrible, worthless person. It's because you were not in control. Let it go, buddy. Find out what influence, what agency do we have, and drop the guilt about all the agency we don't have that we've been falsely ascribing to ourselves. In compassion teachings, that some folks have done like Gestalt work with the empty chair, and they put their mom in the chair or something and talk it all out. And then one of the amazing results is like, oh my God, mom wasn't in control. She wasn't doing this because she was just a jerk. She was doing it because she was abused or had a chemical imbalance or, grew up in this time when that was normal or whatever it was. Not because she was like a type of agent that doesn't exist in the world, right? So rung number two, that type of agent doesn't exist. Stop trying to be that guy. Stop talking trash to yourself because you weren't the agent of ultimate control. You're never going to get there. Let it go. Okay. Then it goes through and you start to get the next rungs up are the mind only views. The next rungs up are the mind-only views. And these, and then beyond those, and this system are those views of total emptiness, total shunyata. We could say total openness is a kind of a more palatable way to say that. But in this schema, sometimes the most practical thing you could do is release into total openness, right? If you've ever hiked up a mountain or the equivalent that works for you, but I've done this, you hike up to a mountain, oh, it's terrible, but your brain's starting to pump out all this anandamide and all the stuff that marijuana has, but you can make it endogenously when you do endurance activities. And then you get to the top and the view expands, wow. And your brain is like, wow. If at that point, and I've tried this, so I know, if at that point you go like, I wonder what I should be meditating on, you ruin it, right? You should just let go into total openness. If you can't, if that's available, that's the most epic thing to do. And anything about, like, if you got to the top of the hill and it's like, wow, amazing. And then your buddy's like, yeah, this too shall pass. It's impermanent. Dude, what a buzzkill, right? Or, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Yes, but that's just your mental projections. No, just let go into total openness. Okay, but then one step down, it is your mental projections, and that's called the mind-only school. Ready? Okay. Computer's not. So mind-only school, mind-only philosophy, Yogacaran Chittamatrin philosophy basically has three important kind of revolutions or new ideas that they come up in Buddhist philosophy. These are cutting through subject-object dualism, number one, that key phrase we've heard of. Now we're going to find out what I think is a practical way to deal with that. Number two, the idea of projection only. I'll tell you what that means in a second. And number two, the storehouse consciousness. Not number two. Number three, the storehouse consciousness. Okay, so what are these? Subject-object dualism in practicality. Oh, no, we got to go backwards. Okay, the storehouse is early Buddhist idea of the unconscious, right? Some of these characters could tell you more about maybe Freud's ideas, Jung's ideas, but Buddhists in early times also had these ideas that all the stuff you think and feel and do and are influenced by, it all gets stored somewhere. And then they particularly thought that your karma was stored somewhere. They were trying to, as I understand it, they were trying to answer a question that in early Buddhism, Buddha says you have no self, but if you're not nice, you'll get bad karma. And then I know some precocious student said, who gets bad karma? You just said there's no self. And it caused a big old problem, and they had to invent the mind-only school about it. There's a famous story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, but somebody asks the Dalai Lama in this story, I've heard that Buddhism has professes the doctrine of no self. Dalai Lama in this story says, yes, that's correct. And the person then says, okay, then who is it that reincarnates? And in this story, the Dalai Lama says, oh, your bad habits. This is the notion of the alaya, the storehouse, is this collection place of your habits, bad, good, and indifferent. The habits of the mind. And according to this philosophy, this part is the mystical part, they say those are planted like seeds into the ground of this storehouse consciousness. And then when conditions are right, when the right kind of forest fire comes through, or the right kind of dung is deposited, or enough rain, the rainy season comes again, those seeds sprout. And that's the ripening of our karma into our perceived world. Okay, the interesting thing then in the projection only aspect of this is they say there may be a world out there. There may be a world out there. These are philosophers. So if you took philosophy 102, I don't think they drop it on the 101 kids. It's too heavy. If you took philosophy 102, you'll get into like solipsism idea, like maybe I'm the only guy around. Maybe there's nothing out there. You'll get into, like the Cartesian dualism, which is really interesting, because Descartes' big insight seemed to be, well, the only thing I can know for sure is that I know for sure that I know for sure. I think, therefore I am. But then he also comes down into the famous Cartesian dualism, you know, that there's mind and body, there's soul and there's nature, or however he put it. Anyway, there were a lot of theories about this. Where mind only comes down to, though, is they say there may be a world out there, but you'll never see it, because everything you see is a result of these seeds of your storehouse consciousness, of your unconscious, we could say for convenience, ripening and flavoring your perceptions with projections. This is how it gets its name. The famous, here, I'll recommend you a nice book if you want to do more of this on your own in a better way than I can tell you. I will recommend a book I just read. If you have Audible, this one is included with your subscription. And this one is called Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara by Ben Connolly, forward by Norman Fisher. And Ben Connolly is associated with our Soto Zen lineage, so it's connected in that way, which is kind of fun. But one of the verses, so he goes through this 80 verses of Vasubandhu on the mind only. And toward the end, Vasubandhu recommends the style of meditation for a mind-only practitioner is rest in projection only. And the idea is, yeah, not just relax with, oh, well, I think this about you, that must be true. No, rest in the idea that I'm thinking about this about you, and that's my responsibility. How I feel about you, what I think about you is on me, because I'm at least never going to see the world without the flavor of my projections. So they give up, to my understanding, on the task of trying to see the world as it is. Can we, and they say, look, recognize that you see the world through a filter of your projections and rest in that. And it's an interesting stance, right? This notion, no, you don't need to see the world as it is, but if you're at least honest and humble enough to note that you're seeing the world as you are, maybe not as it is, you're then seeing life more honestly than ever before. And so you're reflecting on projecting. Yes. Another fun quote I like is, all perceptions are selections. All perceptions are selections, right? There's something on the order, I was told, I don't know how to fact check this yet, but I was told there's something on the order of trillions of bits of information coming at our sensory apparati, and then we can filter in billions of bits of information. And then a number of split seconds later, we become aware that we are aware of that. And then we cogitate about it. And then our limbic system has a fight or flight reaction about it. We react to our reactions and blah, 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 blah. So this school just says, just be aware that there are probably more billions of bits of information that you never had a chance to even register, like even with the sensory apparatus. And so this is where you get fun things in Buddhist and yogic philosophy, where they say, you know, if we were to survey the room, there's probably, you know, I hope, some percentage of you that are really having a good time, really interested. Some percentage of you that are really having a terrible time and are really not interested, but, you know, are staying. I don't know why you're staying. I told you you can leave. And then some percent who are sort of, well, you know, whatever. And all of you are correct. There's enough sensory information to make up any one of those things, right? So it's just getting honest with the fact that we're never not filtering the world. And then what do we filter it through? We could say we filter it through the jungle that has grown from those seeds in the storehouse consciousness, the jungle of our past karma. And this, for practical Buddhism, this can be a catch-all, right? Could it be the circumstances of your birth? Could it be the, the type of brain you inherit and the type of endocrine system you inherited? Yes. Could it be what you have done? Did you train? I have weird habits because I trained martial arts since while my frontal lobe was still developing. And so when people get too close to me at the wrong time, it really impacts the way I sense the world because I was trained to like kick those people. Sorry, and then you have to you have to suppress that urge and then open to a different urge. And so it just changes the whole picture. Whereas if I, was given tango lessons at that age or something, this is actually where it really comes up. If I try to partner dance, martial arts training is really terrible for that because I didn't also do dance training. And so all my instincts are wrong. Like, okay, that's just me. I'm perceiving it. It's really hard not to. Yeah, the dip, I can't do that. They go all the way. So I planted that into my own consciousness, and now I must reap the rewards, right? This metaphor goes fun places that you could do, like certain process of therapy perhaps are like gardening, right? You water certain seeds, you weed out others. You try to create, there are the Buddhist metaphors for this. Maybe this is a type of proto-psychology where they have like, oh yeah, some seeds, if you just make sure they never get the compost they need, they'll never sprout. This is kind of like sometimes in stages of treating addiction, actually, like just don't go to the context. It's context dependent learning, right? So just don't invoke that context and those seeds won't sprout. But it's this notion that if we rest in projection only, and this is actually some scholars that I've read recently think, mind only is a later name that was made up. The one Vasubandhu in the text from the 5th century uses is Vijñapati Matra, which means projectional. It's not just mind, it's the projecting mind. So he says, rest in the fact that you're just projecting all the time. And then chill, be informed. So the slogan I might give you would be projection informed. Okay, moving on so we don't just get caught in a thorn bush here. Okay, so let's make it practical. Cutting through cognitive distortions. So now that we'll use language, this comes from, I was taught it through a lens of cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive distortions are exactly what they sound like. We've got cognition and they come and they distort it. Also very related to old Buddhist metaphors. They relate it to like, when you get, what is it? Is it a cataract? It's actually it's a morphing of the lens on your eye. Is that the right one? That it's cataracts are a growth, but there's one that's where the thing just like warps or something, right? So I forget the name of that, but the stigmatism or something like that, right? So they compare it to that. It's a distortion in your cognition. And then if you live with that long enough, you learn, oh yeah, don't take the sensory information from there as if it were totally accurate. You got to interpret that a little bit, right? So similarly, I know I'm going to self-reveal. They say, watch out with that as a facilitator, but I know I've got a touch of the old avoidant attachment style. Yeah, I got a touch of it. And because of that, my perceptions are distorted in certain ways. Like I have a baseline assumption actually that you should not ask anyone for anything or trouble them at all. Why? Because they'll let you down, of course. Or worse, see you as vulnerable. Egads. Resting in projection only doesn't mean I just go about and explain away, well, I acted like that because I have avoidant attachment style, have a little sympathy for a guy. Instead, like when I'm I want a healthy relationship with my partner. And so when I get a knee-jerk reaction, I go like, wait a minute, dude, is this you rehashing an old trauma? Or does this relate to present moment experience? So I understand that I've got this distortion. And then I can work. It doesn't so far get rid of the distortion, but it does allow me to rest in projection only. Oddly enough, it seems to really work. Okay, so cutting through cognitive distortions. Some of the what do they call them? Greatest hits of the cognitive distortions are things like universalizing. So this is the one, if you ever coached anyone in a relationship, you gotta avoid this. This is where they bring out the always nevers. Oh, you always blah, 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 blah. They're like, no, they don't. They do that 92.7% of the time. But it's not always, and it's dishonest enough that it can wreck the whole relationship. Because when a universalizing statement comes out, you're not dealing with the present moment. You're dealing with like an archetype, a platonic solid, a picture of what's there. And we want to really deal with one another in authentic ways. We can apply these universalizing statements to ourselves. Oh, I'm never on time for such and such. And that's one of those things that you can invoke for it. You can keep repeating that to yourself and make it true sometimes. We also can use these as barbs on ourselves in our self-talk when we use universalizing statements. I haven't met many who use these. I have occasionally met them or heard myself say this, who use these universalizing statements and saying like, oh gosh, you're always so attentive to the hearts of others. Oh, you never give in to your knee-jerk reactions. Like usually what I've heard is we say, oh, I always screw up my relationships. Oh, I never know the right thing to say in these situations. Oh, those always produce anxiety, right? So anytime we hear an always never, we can guess it's a cognitive distortion or it's a projection. The truth may be that most of the time, or very rarely, but always never, these universalizers are a good warning, warning, projection alert. Okay, what about mind reading, right? Another bane of relationship counselors. Well, she just feels like this about me. Like, are you sure? Have we asked? Did we pause and say, do you feel that way about me? Or am I replaying some other archetype and pasting it on this? And then the only thing is I'm forgetting to question whether I have pasted this onto the present situation. I've just pasted it out there and then acted as if it were true. I'm shadow boxing. Fortune telling. This is where we, assume like, oh, I know how this is going to go. For the first 6 months, it's going to be great. And then like always, it's going to deteriorate. It's going to spiral. I'm going to make this many enemies. I'm going to make this many friends. And my friends won't like my enemies. I was like, you don't know that. Our minds are so compassionate though, because what our minds are doing, we're human beings. Part of why we're able to ruin the world so completely like we are now is because our minds are able to extrapolate from past experiences and project likely future experiences, right? This is this human primate superpower, but we can get so good at it that we can cut ourselves off from actual new experiences and just have the past play over and over and over and over. So anytime you find yourself fortune telling, projection alert, check yourself. Okay, and the host of rhetorical fallacies. So things like negativity bias. That's not a rhetorical fallacy, that's a heuristic, that's a neural heuristic, some cognitive bias, that's what it's called. But this is sort of wired into humans because how does it go? If you mistake a snake for a stick, you're in big trouble. If you mistake a stick for a snake, no problem, right? Oh, it was just a stick. Oh gosh. But if just a stick and it's a venomous serpent, you've got a real problem. So our brains are hardwired to see more snakes than sticks. We want to be able to question those, right? So this really comes in. If we have past trauma, the research I'm aware of shows that those projections are often louder than all the past nice stuff that might have happened, right? We also have had times where we dipped our toes into a cool stream and it was just so lovely for about 5 minutes. We've also got other things that took 5 minutes in our lives, and they make up 90% of the projection real estate. They crowd out everything else because the brain is so concerned to keep you safe. But it's a cognitive distortion. Okay, black-white fallacies. It's this way or it's this way, and there's nothing in between. Okay. All or nothing thinking, and etc. So this is just the greatest hits, cognitive distortions. And then some practical ideas. So that's one of my main purposes. The fun for me is a little bit on historical Buddhism, but then how does that historical Buddhism, how might one apply it to our real lives? So one advice is to cut through, quote, false views and, quote, ignorance with inquiry. This word ignorance in my brain right now, I'm translating it from the Tibetan, which is marigpa, unknowing, but it's almost like anti-knowing. So we could say assumptions. So you wouldn't go too wrong if you're reading Buddhist books. When they say ignorance, if you just said assumptions, they still read pretty good and they work pretty well. False views are the same thing. It's like you have an idea about how it is. So we can cut through those with inquiry. Another way of saying rest in projection only would be to say something like, have in your mind this idea, is that true? Oh, really? Or Zhuangzi, the Taoist master's favorite mantra, maybe, maybe not. The famous Buddhist advice, sometimes called beginner's mind, is why not just not know? Why not just not know, right? It could be that you move to the first 6 months are going to be great. And enemies and friends and the whole catastrophe. Does it benefit you, though, to act as if that's so? Or could you deal with that when it comes? But also, if you were to rest in the not knowing, if you were to rest in inquiry, you might be able to deal with something else when it comes. In here, we also have the practical side of you create your own reality, which is if I went into a job interview with the thought, no one ever hires me at job interviews, I'm not going to give a very good job interview. And what do they call that? The self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If I go into a party doing my affirmation inside, oh, I never make friends. Oh, it's really hard for me to connect with people. Oh gosh, this is why I hate parties. I can spiral myself into a place where I will not meet a single person and I will have a miserable time. I predicted it now. And the problem with that is that they get even more firmly implanted into that storehouse consciousness because you've now repeated it and you've proven it to yourself. But if you have a good friend or a good therapist on speed dial, and he's like, I'm going to a party and I think everyone's going to hate me. And they can just go like, I wonder if that's true. Huh, maybe, but also maybe not. Let's see. A whole host of other possibilities might come about. So advice number one would be just don't know. And then the second advice, which relates, part of my ulterior motive is because there's so much Buddhism going around, I like to be able to sort of read that or hear it in ways that are practical. And so Buddhist advices on how one changes oneself often center around planting seeds into one's storehouse consciousness. So how we make change is that we change our karma. And if you were, again, to read a Buddhist text and just change the word karma out for habits, or you could say entrenched habits, something along those lines, you'd get a pretty good reading, a very practical reading of these texts. So when we are changing our mind, if we had the idea of planting seeds, can I go into this party and immediately be an extrovert? No. Could I plant a seed of having a different experience today? And what would that look like? Oh, it might be talking to one person before I run out the door, absolutely scared. Got it. Plant that seed instead of just replanting the self-fulfilling prophecy, and you will have learned some skills for working with resting in projection only. You start to find the controls to where the projector is. And if you don't like the movie that's playing, you have some influence. You're not the controller. That was way back down on the Mahamudra ladder, but you have some influence on what's going to play on that projector.